Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 175, Becoming a Rabbi on the Web. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today is the first day of summer, so we're going to launch a summer series where we're going to look deeply at, for the most part, a wide variety of new organizations, new experiments in American Jewish life. And it feels kind of appropriate to have the holiday of Shavuot, this time where we commemorate the giving of the Torah, as a pivot point between the ideas leading up to potentially a new Torah to some examples of what that might look like on the ground. It seems appropriate to start this series with a new organization that is actually a new rabbinical school, which exists and does its work completely online. The Pluralistic Rabbinical Seminary is launching its first cohort in this coming year. The program is entirely online. It is the first and only online rabbinical program with education and ordination by Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, and independent rabbis and educators. It provides a 2-year rabbinical training program, which they bill as similar to a working professional's MBA program. The educational focus is on practical rabbinics and the skills needed to be a 21st century rabbi. And among those skills is their notion that a 21st century rabbi is going to have to perhaps build new kinds of organizations and new approaches to helping Jews connect with Judaism. Our guests today are Sandy Zisser and Patrick Beaulier. Sandy Zisser is the founder and director of Pluralistic Rabbinical Seminary, as well as serving as its theology instructor. He is a longtime Jewish educator with a master's degree in special education, and he also has rabbinic ordination from the Jewish Spiritual Leaders Institute. Patrick Beaulier is the Director of Strategy and Innovation at Pluralistic Rabbinical Seminary, helping rabbinical students learn the practical skills needed to develop and launch Jewish for-profit and nonprofit projects. He is also the founder and executive director of Punk Torah Incorporated, a series of Jewish educational websites, including Darshan Yeshiva, which is well known for its online conversion to Judaism program. Patrick Beaulier also is the co-spiritual leader of Kehillah, a pop-up Jewish community in Richmond, Virginia. Patrick Beaulier has rabbinical ordination from Rabbinical Seminary International. We're excited to learn about this bold and interesting new project. So, Sandy Zisser, Patrick Beaulier, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you on.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to be here.
So let's jump right in with, I think, a question that'll come to mind for a lot of people who are hearing that a new rabbinical school is starting, which is, why do we need another one?
We live in a completely different world than when these classical seminaries and the yeshivas that came before them were developed. And so new times require new leaders and new modalities of learning. To me, I think the most powerful thing, and this is coming as the person who's involved with what we call our innovation program, is that we have to think about how we are going to build the Jewish future, and we need the right people to be doing that. And the truth of the matter is, in order to really get the best out of people, we need the best people. And they're going to be people who are not going to be able to engage well with brick and mortar seminaries. Asking someone to spend 5 years full-time in a seminary is very difficult for a person who maybe works at a small nonprofit and is putting in 80 hours a week. But if we want those kinds of people with those kinds of backgrounds and those kinds of experiences to become rabbis, we have to meet them where they are. And so when I think about why it is important for us to have a new seminary, something like PRS, Pluralistic Rabbinical Seminary, I think about the number of people who would make amazing rabbis, but for different circumstances are unable to go to a traditional 5-year program, who are not able to move to Jerusalem for a year, which is a requirement of some programs, to spend 50, 60 hours a week on a campus. and can do so many wonderful things online, can engage with their professors, with their rabbis, with their educators online. And the question we have to ask ourselves is not so much, what will the future of education be, but frankly, what's the present? And the present is online education.
More and more people spend most of their lives online, whether it's shopping or reading or learning. More and more places are accessing online for education. And it seems natural for us to think that a seminary online would make sense. So you're pulling together people from not just your area or people who can make it to your area, but you're pulling together people from across the globe who don't actually have to travel anywhere until their actual ordination. So the fact is you are having a much bigger pool of people who may want to do a seminary or have a calling to become a rabbi, but who don't have access to it. And now you do. You have that access. So the idea of a online seminary, of why, I guess in my mind, the answer is really why not? Because it seems as society goes that way, we either change with the times or we don't exist. So I think that many brick and mortar seminaries are also starting to put material online, classes online, because it's the next logical step for training rabbis.
Each of you has been ordained through a seminary or through a something that lives online. I think, do they each think of themselves as seminaries? Is that correct? Okay, so you've each been ordained through online seminaries, and I'd love to hear. So a couple things. One, what led you to that? Forgetting for a second the digital education, what made you want to be a rabbi? Some of those pieces, but also, given that you each did this through programs that exist, what made you want to add, even within the digital world of rabbinical schools, what made you think that even though there already are some, there was this needed add to the landscape?
So my background personally, I've been a Jewish educator for over 30 years. I almost feel like I was born into education. But the idea that way back when I was choosing what to do for college, I had a choice of education or I was thinking of rabbinical school. And I actually went to and interviewed in a number of brick and mortar seminaries. And I didn't really quite fit in any of them, 100%. And I was really feeling that I'd give up something of myself to be part of that organization. So I chose the education route, which actually for me is amazing. For the last 30 years, it's my career and it's what I do. And the idea when I finally decided that I would pursue ordination, it actually was a fluke. I was doing some work. I was doing some research for a class, and sometimes you're tracked online by the searches you do. So in the sidebar popped up, this online rabbinical school. I was like, oh, let me check it out. So I did. And about an hour and a half later, I had filled out the application, and I pressed send because I realized that if I didn't do it now, it's 20 years later, it's going to be gosh, I should have done it. So the fact is that I did, and
that's an argument against privacy online.
Right, exactly. But totally an argument against that in a good way. It could be good, could be bad, right? So at least that was good for us. And that was 8 years ago. I know that the choice of being able to do it from the comfort of my home or from my office or from anywhere, really, you needed an internet connection and the material, was very convenient for me, and it fit into my lifestyle. I had 2 kids, at the time, one in high school, one in grade school. I had a wife. We were married. We were living our life, and it was very easy to do it. I didn't really give too much thought about it at the time. 8 years ago was a totally different world of internet living. It's totally different. At that time, I didn't really think like, oh wow, an online place. What's that about? I sort of just went with it. And I guess I sort of let the God card play out, let that just take me wherever it went, and after being ordained, I really carried my life normally, still was teaching, still was doing everything, had a different title, and it took me about a year to get used to the title. Then when 3 years ago, when we were in the early stages of talking about PRS, about why we need it and how we would do it and why it would be different or similar. The concept was we always wanted to make something better.
So I ended up in rabbinical training almost on a dare. So I've been a Jewish educator for 10 years. It started with a blog called Punk Torah, and I even wrote under a pseudonym because I had no expectation that that was going to be my future. And I wound up in this really crazy situation where, the blog was taking off. So I was making this multimedia, and I wound up finding myself in Jewish education, being the executive director of a nonprofit. And I was at a meeting for the nonprofit, and my vice president was looking at things that I wanted to do, my goals for that year. And he said to me, well, none of this is going to take off unless you do the work of studying to be a rabbi. So my circumstances were, I'm the child of elderly parents. So I'm 36 years old currently. My parents are 79. And so at the time, I had family concerns. I was worried about my parents, their health. My father would later be diagnosed with Lewy bodies disease, which is a form of dementia. And so the idea of packing my bags and leaving Atlanta, Georgia to go to LA or Chicago or New York or any number of places, it just wasn't an option. And I had friends of mine saying, well, you got to choose either your family or your education. And I thought, no, that's unfair. We have this history in the Talmud and in the commentaries of this rabbi was a vintner, who made wine. Oh, Maimonides was a doctor, right? But then when it comes to rabbinical school, it's no, don't live a real life. Go to rabbinical school, right? Like we want you to be a rabbi, not a rabbi and. And so for me, that never made sense. If you want to talk about the world and inspire people in the world, you need to live in the world. You need to have a job. You need to know what it's like to be something other than rabbi somebody. And so the opportunity to do that and to do that through distance learning, I studied one-on-one with a conservative rabbi. And that was just, and then eventually connecting with my rabbinical program. And that was a really great methodology for me. It allowed me to be with my family. It allowed me to learn. And it allowed me to stay in the world and to do, for me, what is real life.
I'm really appreciating the threads that you're bringing up around class. That I think that's what this is. Largely, we have a huge group of people in the Jewish world who are deeply interested in long-term Jewish learning, including becoming a rabbi. Often becoming a rabbi, not only. I would group within this people who want to do, a year, 2 years, intensive Jewish learning, who just can't. And the reasons that they can't, I think, often are tied to just expectations around wealth and class. And the idea that you could just pick up and go to a new city. The idea that you could just put a pause on working in a traditional sense in order to do that and all of the pieces that are tied to it. Your point about, rabbi wasn't always like a profession in the way we think of. Rabbis had other professions. I think that's so crucial. And it comes up for me all the time because people ask me what I want to be as a rabbi or what I want to do as a rabbi. And I always struggle with my answer because I don't want to, I'm not in school to be a rabbi, in the identity sense of being able to say I am a rabbi. I'm in this rabbinical school because I want to do deep Jewish learning. I want to have a set of skills and have experience with a certain set of ideas and also sort of have my ability to shape the future versions of those ideas. But I think that when we get lost in sort of, rabbi is a set of people who sort of achieved an advanced graduate degree. That's what many of these seminaries became, is the equivalent to going to get a PhD or get a master's. And so I love that I think what this sort of resembles are alternative forms of brick and mortar kinds of institutions that emerged that were largely geared towards people who weren't necessarily able to afford the kinds of life sacrifices that are associated with going to 4-year traditional kinds of universities. So I was curious, was that really the juicy intention behind this, or like tell me more about how those class pieces play in, and maybe if you have examples of how people have been served through some of these already existing institutions online, that would be spectacular as well.
You nailed it. That's exactly what it is. And that's why one of the things I like about my job is that for most seminaries, you have some sort of master thesis, right? You have some big paper that you write. But this is, what you're supposed to produce. You're supposed to produce this academic paper. Well, okay, I have nothing against that. But one of the features of our program is that instead of doing that, instead of writing a paper, you actually build a nonprofit, or you build a business, or you build something that is going to help you with what you will sort of be as a rabbi. Now, you may dump that, you may change that, come up with something else, but at least we're getting you started on some kind of path, and it's a path that you're creating. And I think that will do a lot with this class issue, because you'll have people who will find a program like ours. They will inspire people through their programs that they're creating, and it just has this amazing multiplier effect, and it's going to touch so many lives to have Jewish authority figures who at the end of the day have dirt on their hands, or have spit up on their shirts, or whatever they may do for a living. That's going to speak a lot more than sort of the stereotype of a rabbi as someone who's sitting aloof in a room full of books with their nose to some words in Aramaic.
So I hope we can pursue this further as we go on, because I think that as we talk, there'll be all kinds of elements of what a rabbi really is, or has been, or ought to be. It's really core to a lot of what we're talking about here, and why I'm excited about what you're doing. But I want to ask you, Sandy, about sort of other dimensions of who we're talking about here before we move on to the what it is that you're actually doing with them. Because there's class, that's one of the elements here. And then I think there's also age. And I'm wondering what other elements there might be. But I think about it in terms of somebody who has aged out of the category of people who are typically thought to go to rabbinical school. And I personally have no interest in going to rabbinical school, for all the recruiters out there. I want to make sure that you know that. But
that's the whole reason why we were doing this.
Yeah, well, sorry to disappoint. But when I think about the typical way of how we've positioned rabbinical school, like part of it is what you said, Patrick, in terms of that it's positioned as kind of a graduate program with all of those academic, accoutrements. But the other piece is that it's primarily positioned, partly because of those elements, as something for young people. It's something that to be a rabbi is something that we kind of expect a person to decide to be in their 20s, and then they are going to go away to school for 4, 5, 6 years and become a rabbi. And on the one hand, I can imagine that path, and obviously I can imagine it because a lot of people do it, and it's kind of the most ubiquitous path. But when I think about who I would want to be a rabbi, it's often somebody who has gained a lot of wisdom from whatever element of their lives and now is ready to kind of be a guide. And I don't want to be ageist about it, but I don't really expect a person in their late 20s to really be somebody who necessarily has the wisdom of life to guide me. So I wonder if sort of some of my, yeah, sorry, Lex, but some of my skepticism about the whole rabbinic project comes from that, right? And it's exciting to me to sort of imagine a way of reimagining what a rabbi is in a way that gives ordination to somebody who kind of, it strikes me as it's more like a ratification. Like, you're already a rabbi. Life has made you a rabbi. Now we're going to give you a degree. And that's a person that feels to me, I'm willing to give that more of a chance. Like that seems kind of exciting to me. So Sandy, I'd love if you could talk about a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of that dimension of who you're trying to attract to this program.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Dan, because the idea behind, a person who is coming out of college and deciding what they want to do in life, and I know many people who, right out of college go to rabbinical school and they're in their 20s, and they're already rabbis in their minds, and how they behave and how they are perceived. And, the idea that they will become great rabbis in their lifetimes is almost assured, right? Based on how I know them. But it's interesting because the people that we're looking at aren't really coming directly out of college. The people that we're looking to attract and that we are attracting are people who are may have a second career idea, who are in their late 30s, early 40s, who may have already been in a profession where you're helping other people, and then said, you know what, I've always wanted to do this, or it's a calling of mine, or I feel the need to become a rabbi. Dan, you brought this up about the idea that the credibility that comes along with age in the rabbinate. It's funny you say that because I'm thinking back to my experience growing up, and we, at one point, our rabbi retired, and we had a young rabbi come in, and the congregation that was older said, he'll grow into it. He's so young. And then, of course, you look at the older rabbis and they say, wow, he's so old, he should probably retire. So there's definitely, it seems to be like a sweet spot in between those two. So for us, the idea of attracting people with life experience is a necessity for the fact that we want them to be seasoned in life. As Patrick said before, we're not looking at pulpit rabbis being churned out by our seminary. I mean, if you wanted to become a pulpit rabbi, if you were having that calling, we're definitely supporting you for that. The idea, of course, we would like you not to be your run-of-the-mill average pulpit rabbi, to bring those innovative ideas with you to wherever you go, whether it be a congregation or whatever else life takes you to be, the rabbi of a flea market where all your Jews congregate on Saturday morning, where you set up shop there for them. So our idea is to really go out and reach the population where it is, and to work with them there, and to give them ideas and hope for the future for Judaism.
It feels to me that if we think of a rabbi as a clergy person, then that leads to one set of understandings of who should become a rabbi and what the educational content should be. If we think of a rabbi as as perhaps what a more ancient definition was, as a scholar, as somebody who's very knowledgeable in Jewish material, then that might lead to a set of who might become a rabbi, such as, of course, the easy path, the clear path would be someone who's coming from the world of Jewish education. Well, they already have a lot of that scholarship, so it's much easier to sort of give a finishing program to help that person become a rabbi. But there are also other definitions of a rabbi, of that perhaps other religions might call an elder, somebody who's really more of a spiritual guide. And I wonder whether perhaps it's even the person who's spent their career as a psychologist or as a doctor, for example, might be a better candidate to be that kind of rabbi than somebody who's spent their career in Jewish education. And so I guess I just sort of wonder if you could reflect a little bit about the definition of a rabbi that your program is trying to build itself around, or to the extent that it's multi-definitional, then I'm curious how you think about the fact that it seems that the definition of a rabbi is also expanding at the same time that the number of rabbinical programs is expanding. And I wonder whether they should all be generalists, or perhaps what we really need is different rabbinical programs that are teaching different kinds of rabbis.
I like this way that you've worded generalist and specialist. It's interesting to me that the idea of seminary or yeshiva is about making people generalists, right? But for a silly example, and again, this probably comes from the fact that I work in the innovation side of things, but I was sick recently. So I had a choice. I could have gone to a general practitioner. I could have gone to an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and I could have gone to a minute clinic. And I chose the minute clinic. So why did I choose the minute clinic? It was convenient. With my insurance, it was inexpensive. I was getting exactly what I needed, how I needed it, as fast as possible. And this was actually, I think, 2 hours before I had to officiate a wedding, right? So time was the most urgent thing, and getting some sort of quick, if not curative, at least symptom-reducing medicine or something like that, that was my most urgent thing. So I sometimes think to myself, from a rabbinical standpoint, why do we have this urge to make everyone a brain surgeon when what we sometimes need is the minute clinic of Judaism? And I know that kind of metaphor, there's listeners who are probably saying to themselves, like, oh, no, that's so gross. Like, why would you, that's degrading education. And like, well, no, everyone needs to be a chacham. Like, everyone needs to be a great, wise sage. But there's also a practical element to Jewish life. And this is not some amazing, sort of liberal idea. It's the Chabad tefillin booth, right? Sometimes you just have to have that thing right there when you need it. And so, my hope is that we will be thinking about this idea of ordaining rabbis for the path that they want to take. If you're going to work in education, then maybe this type of smicha makes more sense. If you're going to work in the nonprofit world, this type of smicha makes more sense. We are starting in a more generalized way because I'm projecting this out 50 years from now. And you already have it in the Orthodox world. You already have, a shochet, a butcher, and all these other roles. So why not, at least from where I sit personally as a Jew, why not from the progressive side as well?
Yeah, I mean, just on that score, I think a lot about, and I think I've probably mentioned it before in the podcast, I think a lot about an article that I believe I read a long time ago in the New Yorker about a clinic in Canada that treats only hernias. And the people who work there are technicians who are trained in hernia surgery and have a much, much, much higher rate of success than doctors do in performing hernia surgeries. They can't do anything else. And the question, in a way, is whether they should be called a doctor or not. And in our world today, the answer is definitely no. These people are not called doctors; they're called technicians. But there's a way in which, in the Jewish world, we don't seem to have another category, and we don't. You're either a rabbi or you're not a rabbi. And not that we don't have other positions, we do, and they're worthy of great honor. But somehow, in the Jewish world, it seems that if you want to, kind of be seen as someone who can even run a minute clinic, you got to go and become, get the title of rabbi. And the question in my mind is whether we should kind of make that title more freely available and have all kinds of programs. And I think that Chabad is a good example of the training to be a Chabad rabbi is not as rigorous and not as doesn't take as many years as the training to be a conservative rabbi. And you could argue that Chabad kids know more, whatever, and that may or may not be true. I don't think it is. And so, there's a way in which, I think that Chabad, and I don't, in a way, I admire them for this. This is not a criticism of Chabad, that I think Chabad actually has a program that gives people rabbinic ordination to do the work that Chabad rabbis are there to do, which is more like a minute clinic in the way that you're talking about. And so I'm wondering if whether that actually is or ought to be a driving force in the liberal Jewish world as well.
Well, the idea for a rabbi, like if you were to look at the definition, it's not just one word. The definition of a rabbi, is someone who is a scholar who's qualified to interpret Jewish law, but it's also someone who is, could be leading a congregation or a religious officiant, or it goes. I mean, nowadays it's also psychologist, and educator, and you add that list to it. I think that in Judaism, the idea that the title rabbi was given after mentorship, right? So you mentored someone who was your rabbi, and you then become one through that. The idea of the minute clinic, or the idea of a doctor is a generic term, right? If you're going to the doctor, I don't know how many people say, well, I'm going to the oncologist. I don't know why I just chose oncology. I just brought that one up. But the idea that, it's a catchphrase. In many ways, rabbi is a catchphrase as well, for someone who serves the Jewish community in whatever aspect they serve it, not just Jewish leadership in a synagogue or in a congregation or in a school. But the idea that the concept of rabbi is very old, but also needs to evolve and change as we evolve and change.
So, Sandy, as the director of the program, could you give us a bit of a window into what the program is like? Like, what happens? How long is it? What do you do from the moment that you see that bots ad that you responded to from the other rabbinical school, until you graduate as a rabbi? Like, how does that process work?
So to answer that, well, you would go to the jewishpluralism.org, right, and click on the join our online rabbinical seminary. There's a form that you would fill out that asks for more information. I would then get back in touch with you and set up an appointment to discuss, what your intentions are and what you're looking for. And if in that primary conversation it seems that we should move forward, then I would send an application to you. You also have in your application, there's what your innovation is, what your idea is coming into the program. We're not just taking you and say, I'll figure that out as I go. Right? The idea for the program is that you have to come in with an idea saying that, I'd like to explore this option and see where I could go with that and how I could build this. And there's that piece of it. There's also the interview process, which happens with both Patrick and myself. After the interview, we'll then make a decision for your application. Then if you're in the program, you'll find the academics. You're studying courses of Jewish text, Jewish history, language, liturgy, practical rabbinics. There's also a one-on-one mentoring program that each student will be meeting with me throughout the course of the 2 years for the program that will basically guiding them through and making sure that their needs are met, and that if they have any concerns or questions or ideas or other concepts. But the thing that we haven't talked about yet actually is the diversity of our educators, where we actually have pulled together educators, rabbis from the Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and the other denominations in Judaism as well. So we're pulling together. We're not just the idea and concept of our name of pluralistic rabbinical seminary. We actually are pluralistic. We've pulled together this group of people that otherwise would never work together. That we've knocked down the walls of the movements to get people together to actually have conversations, to work out curriculum, to be working together. That is actually something that is very hard to do. And I think that's something else that when someone comes into the program, it's one of the first things they notice. One of the courses that stick out in my mind at the moment is we have a course on Jews and mental health. Okay? Because it's something that I found extremely important. I find the mental health in religion as a whole gets shortchanged. I also find that it is something that Judaism is just waking up to, and as much as the rest of the world is, that the mental health is actually an issue. So we have it's actually our Orthodox rabbi who is teaching that course because he does that in life. That's part of what he does. So I'm excited about that course. Actually, I might even sit in on it because it sounds really exciting for me.
We have all of the academic learning and the electives and all of the really great modalities. And then the question is, what is going to be your innovative product? Because it's not exclusively nonprofit. It's whatever you think is going to make the Jewish world better. So say, for instance, you want to build a website that does a certain thing. Well, my joke has been, I'm really glad that there are people in the world who know Rashi script, but it's also really important to know JavaScript. So if that's something that we need to help you to have that is maybe even outside of our program, then we'll help you to find that. So it's really a tailored and customized program within a program. And we will have people who will be ordained, who will have smicha, but we're also, in a sense, providing smicha to these new, really great, innovative projects.
When I talk to folks as somebody who is in a program that is differently online, but also largely online, most of the time people are very enthusiastic and excited to learn in the same way they'd be about interacting with anybody in whatever educational program they're in. Sometimes there's different threads that come up in various tones, to be totally frank, where people really are ready to feel negative thoughts towards online rabbinic education. People for whom this very presence of online schools, and whether it's specific schools or the whole ecosystem. Their very presence is sort of a shot at the Jewish world that they hold dear. And honestly, I'm guessing some of these people are listening right now. And so I was wondering I'm wondering if you hear similar things. I'd love to hear no, by the way. I'd love to hear that you don't hear people giving shots at rabbinic education. Maybe, I hope it's a smaller group than I perceive. But if you do hear such things, I'm wondering, how do you respond to folks who see online education as just somehow inherently a problem or a harm to the Jewish world more than a service to it? What would you say to those folks?
One amazing thing that I want to say is we have received zero criticism. I think that on one article that I wrote on one website, one person said, hey, make sure there's lots of pastoral care included, right? So that's the one, and that's as sort of mean and trolly as it's gotten, as someone actually offering great advice that, by the way, we follow, because we knew that was going to be an issue. I should say we, really Rabbi Sandy, since that was his area of expertise. But I want to tell a quick story that can help us to think about this question of online. So prior to forming PRS, we worked on Darshan Yeshiva. So Darshan Yeshiva was a project that I and another rabbi who I have talked about before in different venues, Rabbi Ben Romer of blessed memory, built together. And it was to do initially lay Jewish leadership training, and that didn't work. What ended up happening was our conversion to Judaism program. And so that program, I think, is about 5 years old at this point. And to date, we have Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Renewal, post-denominational, secular humanistic rabbis. I think we have probably 25 rabbis who are active on the site now. We have 5 who are taking a break. But we have this plurality of people. And if ever there was something you were going to criticize, it would be that. And boy, did we get it. We got a lot of criticism when we first started, to the point that I had people trolling me personally and threatening me. But now we will receive emails from rabbis in synagogues and brick and mortar synagogues saying, I do not have time to do a conversion program for the one student that I have, or the 2 students I have. I am going to send them to you. And that's where we are now. So over 5 years, you go from one Times of Israel article where everyone hates your guts to now being a leader and having, what I wouldn't even know to guess what our statistics are anymore on that website as far as the number of Jews we've helped make. So if there is going to be any criticism, that's fine. That's okay. There are people who think Hebrew Union College is the worst place in the world, right? That hate the Reform movement, or people who think that there shouldn't be as many Haredi communities, ultra-Orthodox communities. Any criticism that we will have in the future will be that we haven't ordained enough people.
It's interesting because when we first launched and we launched in stages. So we announced we were doing this. A few weeks later, we announced our instructors, and we had those instructors. We went through Facebook as a platform, and we tagged each of those instructors so their friends could see what we were doing and growing that community out. And what's interesting is that one of our instructors is a friend with a friend of mine who I call the poster child for the conservative movement, and when he heard about it, he contacted me and said, what is this? And, when I heard him say that, I was like, okay, where is this going to go? Because I could see it, and he said, we have to get together because this is amazing. I need to know what you're doing because this sounds like it's totally amazing. So we did. We sat for about an hour and a half and talked about, the program and how we got to it. And he thought it was great. There was this idea that most people, I know a lot of Jewishly oriented people, a lot of rabbis are friends of mine from different movements, and they all think it's a great idea, which is very interesting to me. It's not what I thought was going to happen personally, but this idea that we had zero or very little criticism, in my mind, shows the normalcy of this idea of online learning and this idea of that becoming a rabbi or really any degree doesn't necessarily have to be the way it always has been. The average person, when you meet them and you tell them you're a rabbi, their first question is, "Oh, where'd you get your degree? Where'd you get your smicha from?" That's not the first question. The first question is, "Okay, that's great. Here's what I need." The only people who actually ask you that question of where you graduated from are other people in the field, other rabbis who want to know where you're from, to do that 2 minutes of Jewish geography and try to figure it out. And then when you tell them, there may be that doubt piece or something like that. But that's, as Patrick said, with any person doesn't hold the same way you do, you have an opinion about it. So maybe that's why we haven't actually had that pushback for what we're doing.
I'll sort of break the fourth wall on this one. So it took a little bit of time for Sandy and I to finally say, okay, we're going to do at least an initial set of strategies and all of that. And it was because I had been through the experience of being diagnosed with a chronic illness and being in the hospital and having Darshan Yeshiva launch at the same time and having a nasty article come out in Times of Israel all on the same day, which was while I'm in a hospital bed, like reading sort of the trolling emails that I got. And I recall the exact moment we were having a meeting about something else, and I was about to go get a haircut. And I was standing in front of the barbershop. And I believe your exact words to me were, "So when are we going to start this seminary already?" And I said, fine, I give. Just let's do it. Fine. Let's have a meeting on Monday or whenever and let's get it going. So if I have any regrets this far in, it's that we didn't start sooner. It's amazing to me that we get to do this.
We are going to wrap up, but thank you both so much for coming on the show and for the contributions you're making with Pluralistic Rabbinical Seminary. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure being here.
And thanks, of course, also to all of you out there listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. We want to close out this episode in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. And there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. Third, you can go to our Twitter feed at Judaism Unbound. And last but not least, email us. You can hit us up at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. We love receiving notes from our listeners. The last request we'd like to make is that we really deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation that you can send our way, and you can do that at judaismunbound.com/donate with either a one-time gift or a monthly recurring donation. So thanks so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.